Around in Israel together with guides from Stand With Us, and in Israel they have also met Charlotte. Charlotte Korchak is one of the leading speakers for Stand With Us, and she impressed our young people, and I'm sure she will also make a big impact in you with both her personal story and also what she's going to share in the second lecture about the 7th of October massacre and how that has affected her and the country. So without any further ado, please welcome Charlotte Korchak.
All right, good morning, everyone. Which is hard to say. You know, I've been a speaker for Stand With Us for 13 years, and I feel like my life is now divided into two. Before October 7th, and then after October 7th. And to be honest with you, I haven't spoken and given my story, told my story since October 7th. I've spoken, I don't even know how many times, almost every day, multiple times a day, in multiple places around the world. I've spoken in Canada, I've spoken in Los Angeles, in Boston, in Israel, and every time I got up to talk, my story just didn't seem like it mattered. We lost 1,200 people in one day. The worst massacre since the Holocaust of Jewish people. And nothing else seemed like it has mattered in the last 5 weeks. It's just a different world that I'm living in. And I should apologize in advance. I have no idea when the emotions are gonna come. And sometimes I'm very emotional and other times I'm very numb. And today seems like a very emotional day. So just bear with me as I go through these next couple of hours with you. So my name's Charlotte Korchak. I'm the International Senior Educator for Stand With Us. And I've been with Stand With Us for, like was said, 13 years. I started out as a little kid. I'm 36 years old now. I started out, is that me?
Yeah, maybe come a bit further.
This is better for me. I don't like being behind a table anyway. And that's also, I appreciate the laughs. You know, I speak to mostly Jewish. It's not my fault. I don't know what's going on. Is it me? Okay. I speak to mostly Jewish audiences, and in the last 5 weeks, I kept making jokes here and there. Usually I'm full of jokes and I'm full of energy, but it's been hard in the last 5 weeks, and whenever I would make a joke and the Jews would laugh, I would say, good, at least Hamas hasn't taken that from us as well, because if they've taken our Jewish humor, they've taken everything from us as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, back to my story. So I'm the International Senior Educator. Wow, this is very annoying. Can I talk without the microphone? No. It's the interference, I think, from all the other microphones. Okay, sorry. Technical difficulty. Oh, that's horrible. Okay, maybe that's better. Oh, okay. Seems like it's working. Yeah, we're good. Okay, there we go. All right. So back, oh, okay. Hi, good morning. Woo. Can't see anyone's faces. All I see is spots. Okay, here we go. So again, like I was saying, I'm Charlotte Korchak. I'm the International Senior Educator for Stand With Us. And I've been with Stand With Us for 13 years of my life. Started out with them right after I finished up university. But I really started out with them when I was in university. But my story begins well before that. So let me start with me. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, so you can tell from my lack of accent that I'm obviously not a native-born Israeli. I was born and raised in Los Angeles in what can only be described as a Jewish bubble, right? Los Angeles is the third largest Jewish population in the world. In terms of, if you take cities, it would be Israel and then New York and then Los Angeles. So a nice little Jewish bubble, never experienced anti-Semitism, was just living in my normal life, going to Jewish day school. But when I was 9 years old, my parents decided to uproot me and my 4 older siblings and move us to the land of Israel. Now I say the land of Israel, not the state of Israel, because my family moved to what many would refer to as a disputed territory or an occupied territory, or what some might just call Palestine. My family actually moved to a settlement, a Jewish community in Judea and Samaria in the West Bank. And I was 9 years old and I had no idea what that meant, and I was just dragged there, and my parents mostly moved there because it was cheap, and we had friends who lived there, and it wasn't like we were ideological settlers going to settle the land. It was just a comfortable place to land in Israel. But after a year, we lived in a very small town, and I had a year in this town, and I hated my life. I didn't want to be in Israel. I was an American, and I grew up in Los Angeles, and I wanted to be with my friends in Los Angeles. And throughout that year in this community, this small, tiny community, I had one best friend. Her name was Rachel. And she was my ride or die, as we say in English. She was my partner in crime, literally. We got in trouble together. We did everything together. We spent most of our days together. And she had also just made Aliyah. She had just immigrated to Israel as well from the United States. And we were angry together, if you will, as little 9 and 10-year-olds. And after a year of really getting through the year together, my parents decided to move to Jerusalem. Tiny towns were not for us. Like, our neighbors wanted to be our friends, and we were like, no. And we found the biggest city we can find, which is, of course, Jerusalem. And we moved to Jerusalem. We lived in Jerusalem for 4 years. 2 years into us living in Jerusalem, the Second Intifada began. Now, it's nice to talk to an audience who knows what that is, and to talk to an audience who was already born at that time period, because usually I'm speaking to groups where the Second Intifada is a historical event for them. But I think everyone in this room, most of us in this room, remember the Second Intifada. We remember those 4.5, 5 years between 2000 and 2005 when Israelis were being murdered. I used to call it the worst time period in modern Israeli history. I haven't been able to say that since October 7th, because we are now for sure living through the worst time period in modern Israeli history. But that was my childhood. 4.5 years of over 1,000 Israelis being murdered in suicide bombings, in stabbings, in shootings. And before the Second Intifada broke out, it broke out in September of 2000. I turned 13 a month before, in August of 2000. And up until that point, I knew nothing about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. How much do you know about a very complicated conflict when you're 13? And how much do you care? Let's be honest. And so I didn't have an opinion about Israel and the conflict. I didn't know the history of Israel. I had never learned the depths of the modern history when it came to the Palestinians. But then all of a sudden, people were being murdered all around me. I lived in Jerusalem. We suffered over 600 terrorist attacks in Jerusalem alone during those years. And it became this reality of many different emotions. The first was, of course, fear, a feeling I have felt a lot of in the last 5 weeks. It's sad that I walked through Oslo and I really debated, should I tuck in my Jewish star? Don't worry, I didn't. I wasn't going to. That's weird. You're applauding for me, not for that, right? We have to clarify. Sorry. That was bad timing. Yeah, I didn't. And actually, I should tell you, I have a side bag that I wear, and on it I have an Israeli flag keychain that I got right at the beginning of the war from a couple of Israelis who were working in Montreal, and they wanted to do something, and so they made these little keychains for all the kids in the school that they worked at. And I had this Israeli flag on, and as soon as I got off the plane, a woman was walking behind me, and she stopped me and she said, "Hey, so like I just want to warn you, I don't mind that flag, but some people in this country might, and you might want to be careful." She said, I was always raised to support Israel. My parents raised me to support Israel, to be sympathetic to the Jewish people, but some people in this country might not be so sympathetic. So you might want to, you might not want to be so out and proud. And I looked at her and I said, the only thing I have left right now is to be out and proud. So if somebody wants to beat me up for being Israeli, beat me up for being Israeli. I just don't care anymore. I just don't. I am a Jew, and I am an Israeli, and I am a Zionist, and I'm proud. And I haven't encountered anything bad. Actually, I went back to the airport in Oslo to come here to this city that I can't pronounce. Don't hold it against me. And the guy in the airport also said, he saw my little flag and he said, "I like your flag." And I said, "Thank you very much," because a lot of people don't right now. Really appreciate it. So I've only had positive experiences here. But I can't say that for Jews around the world right now. Jews around the world right now are very scared. So going back to the Second Intifada, I lived through the Second Intifada for 2 years, and the primary emotion that I felt was fear. I didn't know if I was gonna come home at the end of the day. That was my reality. I got up every day, I got on a bus to go to school, a public bus, which were at the time the primary targets of suicide bombers. And I never knew if I was gonna make it home. I didn't know if my parents were gonna make it home. I didn't know if my siblings were gonna make it home. And every day it was this genuine fear of, am I gonna lose my life, or is somebody else gonna lose their lives that I love? And then came, from the fear, you know, in Israel we say, you could be afraid, be scared, but be prepared. Don't just be scared, right? So the next emotion, the state of mind that I lived in as a child was to be very alert and aware of my surroundings. Never to rest. You always had to look around to make sure that somebody wasn't threatening you. And so when I would wake up, I'd go and I'd get on my bus to school, and I would choose my seat on the bus based on where I thought I was most likely to survive. So suicide bombers, I knew, usually blew themselves up in the front or in the middle, so I always went to the back of the bus. And I sat in the back of the bus so I could have a good vantage point of everyone getting on the bus, getting off the bus, be in the back, so if I saw something, I could duck. Maybe, you know, a guy gets on the bus and he's wearing a big puffy coat, but it's the summer in Jerusalem. That's weird. Hold on, what's going on there, right? And then maybe he reaches into his coat, right? That's your cue. Duck. He's about to blow himself up. And by the way, there was a kid on a bus who actually saw the suicide bomber, and he did just that. He ducked, and it saved his life. So I paid attention, right? If a guy got on the bus with a backpack, right, walked to the middle of the bus, put the bag down, goes and sits down, and then a couple stops later he gets off the bus, but the bag is still there, you better notice. Because he might have just left a bomb on your bus. That was my childhood. That was my adolescence, 13, 14. It was, again, be aware, because at any moment, somebody who wants to kill you might actually try to kill you. The hardest part of the Second Intifada was the frustration. That for many developed into anger, that for some developed into hatred. And I remember the jump when it went from anger to hatred for me. For most of us, we were experiencing loss, grieving on a level that's hard to explain. And now there's no comparison because I'm living in a world now where all of my friends are grieving. Every day I open up Facebook or Instagram and it's another post from another friend who lost a friend or a family member on October 7th, or since, because we're still losing people every day. We lost 5 soldiers just yesterday. So the frustration of just losing people, and again, people being murdered, right? It's not people dying in a car accident or an overdose. It's people being murdered because there's an entity out there that wants us dead. And unfortunately, you know, Israelis, I shouldn't say unfortunately to this, put that aside. You know, Israelis are not raised to hate. We're just not. I went to multiple schools. I went to a school in the settlements, right? And I never was taught hate. I went to school in Jerusalem, a religious school, a secular school, and I was never taught to hate, ever. In fact, I grew up in a home with parents who were the most tolerant and welcoming and open people you will ever meet. My parents never saw anything but the content of somebody's character. And that's how they raised me. So we had Palestinian friends before the Intifada. Weirdly enough, when I was 12 years old, I was taken to Jericho and I smoked hookah with the ex-mayor of Ramallah. Side story. But I had Palestinian friends. I had Arab friends. I had been exposed to that world, unlike many Israelis. And I was never again taught to hate, ever. The tragedy is that some Israelis have hatred in their hearts. And the reason for that is not because they were taught to hate, necessarily, but because something happened to them that pushed them into a place of hatred. And again, I know because I was one of those people. I said was, and that's really an important word that I'll get to eventually. But on February 16th, 2002, it was a day where it became impossible for me to not feel hatred. February 16th, 2002 was a Saturday, and I came out of Shabbat, And like we always did, my mom always turned on the news, and the news sat on permanently in the background during the Second Intifada, just in case. And a couple hours after Shabbat ended, a headline came across the screen that there was a suicide bombing in the old settlement that I used to live in. It said, Pigua beginot Shomron, a bombing in Ginot Shomron, Karnei Shomron, where I used to live. And instantly I knew this wasn't going to end well. They had already said that 2 people had been killed. And unfortunately, you won't find out names that night. So I had to go to sleep, or try to go to sleep, knowing that some of my friends might be gone. Because this was a place where my friends would go often. And it was a Saturday night, that would be where they would have gone. So I went to bed, or I tried to go to sleep, and I woke up the next morning, and I did my normal routine, and I got ready for school, and then I went downstairs, and long story, but my parents, we had a lot of dogs at the time, and so I would always just knock on my parents' door and say, bye mom, bye dad, I love you. And when I did, my mom, who, I guess she was very Israeli at that point, because there was no thought in her head about what she was about to say to me, but she yelled out to me, Charlotte, do you know Karen Shatsky? Now, I knew exactly who she was talking about. Karen's face immediately flashed in my head, but I didn't want to know. So I just said, I don't think so. And I went and I got on the bus. And I was in denial. I got on the bus to school, and I went all the way to school, and the whole time her name's ringing in my head, her photo is flashing in my head, and I'm just thinking, it's not, it's somebody else, it's not. And when I got to school, I ran to the nearest kiosk where there were newspapers. And when I unfolded the newspaper, not only did I see Karen's face, but I also saw my friend Nehemiah's face. 2 of my friends had been murdered the night before. Nehemiah, unfortunately, was standing right next to the suicide bomber. And so he was killed instantly. Half of his head was blown off. His body was thrown about 30 feet. And tragically, his older brother actually was the one to find his body. Karen, I found out the next day, going to her funeral, that she was standing close by to the bomber and she had taken the brunt of the shrapnel. Suicide bombers pack their bomb with nails and screws to cause as much carnage as possible. And Karen was just sprayed with shrapnel. And she spent 4 hours that night fighting for her life, and then she died of her wounds. I showed up to Karen's funeral, and I was looking around. And I looked at some of my friends, and I said, guys, where's Rachel? Where's Rachel? And I was told that Rachel, I was told that Rachel was in the hospital alongside her brother. They were both injured in the attack. Her brother was in moderate condition, but she was in severe critical condition. Rachel had sustained a head wound. She took 1 nail to the head. And over the next 10 days, slowly but surely, blood will stop flowing to her brain. And 10 days later, Rachel died of her wounds. So in the span of 11 days, I lost 3 of my friends. And I was 14 years old at the time. The 2 of Karen and Nehemiah were 15, and Rachel had just turned 16, celebrated her 16th birthday. And there I was, a 14-year-old kid, and I had no idea how to process any of this. How do you explain to yourself why your friends were murdered? Because that's what happened to them, they were murdered, right? Again, accidents, I've lost friends to car accidents, to overdoses. It's not the same. Because in this case, you have somebody to blame. Somebody real to blame, not just God, which I have my own beef with God, and we have it out all the time, and our relationship is fine. Yeah, I yell at him sometimes, I thank him sometimes, I praise him sometimes. We have a full relationship, me and God. But in this case, I had somebody to blame. The Palestinians. And obviously it's not the Palestinians. I'm an adult now and I can say it's not the Palestinians, it's Palestinian terrorists, right? It's the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the organization that committed this attack. But I couldn't process that as a kid. I started to hate Palestinians as a collective. Because you're murdering my family members and my friends. I probably do what I do every single day because of Rachel, Karen, and Nehemiah. They don't have a voice, and neither do I. And so I do for them. And now I have to also have a voice for 1,200 people who were killed 5 weeks ago, and for 239 people who are still sitting in captivity. The Second Intifada waged on for many years. And after February of 2002, my family had already started to talk about moving back to the United States, not because of the terrorism, God forbid, but because we just couldn't survive in Israel anymore. The economy had crashed. So our business had gone bankrupt, and we were really surviving by the skin of our teeth. And within a few months, my family started to move back to the United States. My father had moved back in April, two of my siblings in May, and then came June 18th. And June 18th is another day that really sticks with me. June 18th was the day that I woke up and everything was normal. And for me, the day was mostly normal. The only weirdness was I had broken my leg a couple of weeks earlier. I got on the hood of my friend's car and he started driving, and while I flew off, broke my leg. And so that morning I got up and I followed my normal routine. I got ready for school. I went out to the bus. I hobbled to the bus stop in my crutches. And when I got on the bus, I sat right behind the driver, which was unusual because I would usually go to the back, but I was in crutches. Sat right behind the driver. And we pulled out of my neighborhood of Gilo. And the neighborhood of Gilo butts up to the city of Bethlehem. And we, pulled out of the city of my neighborhood of Gilo on the outskirts of Jerusalem. And when you leave the neighborhood of Gilo, the next bus stop only caters to 2 Arab communities that were our neighbors in Gilo, neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, of Arab neighborhoods. And so I always knew that if somebody got on that bus stop, they would be an Arab. Now let me be very clear about something. Not all Arabs are terrorists. I'm going to say it again. Not all Arabs are terrorists, and not all Muslims are terrorists. That being said, in Israel, 99.9% of terrorism that's been targeted towards Jews has been committed by Arabs. So not all Arabs are terrorists, but the terrorists in Israel are Arabs. So if an Arab got on, I had to naturally be suspicious. It was survival. And I always was scared of anyone getting on that bus stop. And that day, nothing happened. We drove right past the bus stop. And I remember looking out the window and there was nobody there. Thank God there was nobody there. 5 minutes later, there would be somebody there. Meanwhile, I get to school and everything's normal. And about 20 minutes later, I get a phone call from my father. Now, my father was already in the United States. And I pick up the phone and he says, Shar? And I said, yeah, who's this? Now, I could tell it was my father, but why are you calling me? I'm in school. This is weird. And he said, it's your father. And I said, Abba, why are you calling me? I'm in school. And he said, I just needed to hear your voice. Abba, what's going on? You're freaking me out. Because I could hear something was wrong. And he said, Shar, there was a bombing on the 32 bus. The 32 bus was the bus that I took to school. Little did I know, but 5 minutes after I drove past that bus stop, a suicide bomber showed up to that bus stop. And he got on the bus, and the bus started pulling out of the station, and he immediately blew himself up. He murdered 17 people from my community that day. And for my family, for about 45 minutes to an hour, they all thought I was dead. This is the reality for Israelis at that time. We didn't know, again, who was going to come home safely. And it really shaped me. It shaped so much of who I am, because one of the most important things to me, and one of the most important values that I will always hold dear, is the protection of the Jewish people. Because for so much of our history, we didn't have the ability to protect ourselves. And when we are at risk, it becomes so challenging. And all I desperately want is for Jewish people to be safe in this world, and Israelis to be safe in this world. And at that time, thank you. And at that time, we didn't have that safety. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I'm alive. I'm grateful that I survived. But every time you say that, you think of the over 1,000 people who didn't make it. And again, it shaped me. So I missed a suicide bombing by 10 minutes. My friends were murdered in a suicide bombing, and I left Israel with a lot of negative feelings towards Palestinians. No doubt about it. And my family decided, like I said, to move. We moved from Jerusalem to Las Vegas, of all places. So from the holy city to the city of sin. And I found myself in a remarkably different world, right? I was in what people call America's playground, right? I mean, you go to the gas station and people are playing slots. It's weird, okay? And I found myself at a high school, a public high school in Las Vegas, over 2,000 students, 8 of them were Jewish. Okay, I went from a world where everyone was Jewish, mostly, to a world where there was me and 7 other Jews. And I had come from a war, essentially. People don't call it that, but that's what it felt like. And all of a sudden, I'm in a normal world. And I had a year in Vegas. And a year in Vegas was enough, let me be real, for all of us. And so after a year of living in Vegas, having experienced one anti-Semitic incident in Vegas, that was it. And it was casual anti-Semitism. You know casual anti-Semitism? Where somebody just drops like a casual, like, oh, he Jewed him down, one of those. And you're like, yo, bro, that's still anti-Semitism no matter how casual it is. And it's very dangerous, by the way. But other than that, Israel was this thing that I loved, that I experienced some crazy stuff in, and that was it. And I had left it aside. My friends were still there. I worried about them. The Intifada was still going on. We lasted a year in Vegas, like I said, and then we moved to Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. And I went to a school that was over 50% Jewish, if you will. And more comfortable environment, a lot of more Jews around me. And I immediately get there and I'm at a really good public school. And so they're encouraging me, get active, get involved, so you can go off to the best universities possible. That was the idea. And so they pushed me to get active in something. And usually this is where people think, this is when she's going to get active for Israel, right? And to fight anti-Semitism. I didn't. And the reason was very simple. I just didn't know that that was a thing. I didn't know that Israel needed activism. I didn't know that I needed to fight anti-Semitism. I hate to say it, I thought the reason before was simply because I lived in a world that we all remember. Remember that world before social media? It was a good world. And I just didn't see anti-Semitism. That's the reason that I've ascribed for the last 10 years. But recently I've started to realize that that's not the only reason. It's also because we have just seen a massive rise in anti-Semitism around the world. And maybe it's that more people feel comfortable being anti-Semitic publicly, or maybe it's that more people are becoming anti-Semitic, but either way, we're seeing a growing problem. And when I was in high school, it just wasn't that big of a problem. So I didn't do anything. I didn't get active for Israel. I didn't get active for the Jewish people. I did other things to try to please the university gods, if you will. I was like manager of our swim team, because I wasn't good enough to be on it. I was the mascot at my high school. This is only something that us dumb Americans do, but you know what I'm talking about, where you dress up like an animal of some kind, yeah? Maybe? No? Just me? So I went to Winston Churchill High School. I was the bulldog. So I used to dress up like a bulldog, and I would dance around at football games and basketball games. Best times of my life. Little kids would come up and want to play. I'd jump out at them. They'd start crying. I would laugh. It was great. I had a great time when I was in high school. You could say I was blissfully ignorant of a very dangerous world. And then somehow I did manage to please the university gods. I got into the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. So I made my way back out to LA, back where the whole story begins. And my first 6 months at USC, you could say I was a very normal, average American university student. And I'll just let you all use your imaginations, all right? I don't really remember much of that first 6 months. And then, come second semester, and I'm walking on campus, and I come face to face with an apartheid wall. A wall that's put up on campuses throughout the world today that call Israel an apartheid state, depict our security barrier, the barrier that was put up, by the way, the decision was made to build that barrier the day after I missed that suicide bombing. Because the suicide bomber had walked from Bethlehem into Jerusalem, and there was no barrier to stop him. And the next day, on June 19th, was the day that the decision was made to build the security barrier that has now reduced terrorism by over 95%. And there I am looking at this wall, and it's being referred to as an apartheid wall, not a barrier to protect innocent lives from terror, but an apartheid wall because apparently I'm racist. And on this wall, they just demonized and delegitimized the state of Israel. Zionism is racism. That was the day I woke up and basically realized that apparently I was a racist because I believe that Israel has a right to exist in the land of Israel. Crazy, right? I learned that we were committing an ethnic cleansing, which, by the way, we have not. And I woke up. I woke up to the world that I now have lived in for the last 17 years of my life. The world of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And I woke up to the reality that there I was, a young Jewish girl who had grown up both in the United States and in Israel, and I didn't know how to defend myself. I didn't have the information, I didn't have the facts, I didn't have the tools. I didn't have what I needed to be able to stand up and speak out for my people and for myself. And that was the day that I woke up. It was my aha moment, if you will, of my life. And it set me on the trajectory that I've now been on for the last 17 years. I, that summer, decided to go to Israel. I went on a trip for 2 weeks, and I learned all about Israel. I learned the history, I learned the background, I learned about the Palestinians, I learned how to be active for Israel on campus. And I went back to campus, and I spent the next 3 years of my time on campus being an activist for Israel. And thank you. It almost, to me, doesn't deserve an applause. To me, it's just an obvious. What do you mean? Of course I'm going to stand up for Israel and the Jewish people. It's my people, it's my country, right? And they're in need. That day on campus, I did what you should never do in moments like these, right? In moments like those where somebody's attacking you and saying, you know, Zionism is racism and all the other things we've heard. In that moment, what I should have done, because I knew nothing and I had no skills, I should have walked away, right? Go tell somebody who could do something about it more effectively, because I couldn't. And instead, I walked up to these people and I started screaming at them, which, by the way, is not effective. It's the worst possible thing that you can do. You look crazy. Nobody wants to listen to somebody who's screaming like a crazy person. But I learned a lesson. I needed to be more prepared. And what I've essentially been doing for the last 17 years of my life is preparing myself. And I feel like I always will be. But now, you can ask me any question about Israel and I'll have the answer. And it's the most infuriating thing, by the way, watching debates online, because I know every answer to every question, but I have no time to answer every question. And so what I try to do is educate others. So I continued my journey as an activist, and I was lucky enough to find Stand With Us. Stand With Us is an organization that has worked tirelessly to fight anti-Zionism, and now we work tirelessly to fight anti-Semitism as well. And boy, have we been busy in the last 10 years, but we've been exceptionally busy in the last 5 weeks. More busy than we've ever been. Sleepless nights and really hard work. But I started as a fellow for Stand With Us on my campus. We have a fellowship program called the Emerson Fellowship, which spans now the United States, Canada, Brazil, the UK, the Netherlands, South Africa, and we are just opening in Australia as we speak. And I got to take part in this fellowship where I was trained and I was able to be an activist for a year on my campus on behalf of Stand With Us. And then I was lucky enough that after I graduated, they gave me a job. And I've been with them now, like I said, for over 13 years. Doing this work, I started out in the United States mentoring students. And then I decided I wanted to go home. And almost 11 years ago, I moved back to Israel. And I've been living in my home in Jerusalem ever since. And I feel very blessed that I was able to go back to Israel. I feel very blessed that I always had that in me, and that it was easy, the kind of transition back, but also because when you get back to Israel, something happens. All of a sudden, you're not surrounded by anti-Semitism. I mean, it's there, but that's not necessarily the driving force. There's a conflict going on. And when you talk about things in Israel, you're talking about the conflict. You're not talking about anti-Semitism abroad. And by the way, that's exactly what's happening right now, right? In Israel, everyone is consumed with this war, obviously. Most of the country is in reserve duty, right? For those of you who were at this conference last year, by the way, the other speaker from Stand With Us, Yoni Zierler, I don't know if any of you remember Yoni, but Yoni is in reserve duty. He was called up on October 7th. He's been away from his wife and his 2 children for over 5 weeks now. He had one day where he was able to go home and visit them. But in Israel, we're in war mode. Outside of Israel, the Jews are in a war mode as well, but fighting anti-Semitism. So when I moved back to Israel, I didn't have to also fight anti-Semitism. I got to explore the conflict more. And boy, did I need to, because let's go back to what I said earlier. I hated Palestinians. How can I be a proper educator and give a full picture when I can't understand the other perspective? I couldn't see it, I couldn't explain it, and so the beauty of going home was I wasn't able to just sit and talk to Israelis, which, by the way, I mean, if anyone ever says, oh, the Israeli perspective, what's the Israeli perspective? I mean, 2 Jews, 4 opinions, and 10 political parties. That's how we roll in Israel. So the idea that you're gonna have one Israeli perspective, no, there's gonna be a lot. The right, the left, the religious, the secular, you name it, there's perspectives. And I got to learn all of those and talk to Israelis. The best thing to do in Israel, just talk to your cab driver. They're the most opinionated Israelis you will ever find. And I live in Jerusalem, so half my cab drivers are Arab residents of Jerusalem and half are Jewish residents of Jerusalem, and it's the most fascinating thing because most of us don't hate each other. In fact, just the opposite. And then I had the incredible opportunity to not just explore Israel, but to explore within the territories of the West Bank. And go into places like Ramallah and sit in the PLO building and hear from the PLO. What do you think? How do you feel? To listen to people like Nabiv Shath, who was advisor to people like Arafat and to Mahmoud Abbas. To go to Bethlehem and sit in the Palestinian Security Forces offices and hear their perspective. To sit with our friend from Roots, Ali Abu Awad, in his Center for Palestinian Nonviolence, and hear a perspective that tragically a lot of Israelis and Jews don't hear a lot, which are Palestinians who fight for nonviolence, who believe that the land is a homeland for both Jews and Palestinians, and that the only way we're ever going to be able to move forward is when we all acknowledge that. And I had the opportunity to sit with Palestinians in places like Hebron and sit in their living rooms and hear them tell me that some of them say, I don't think you guys should be here. So I've also tried to hear the gamut of perspectives amongst the Palestinians. And again, I was lucky enough that with that and a lot of therapy, I don't hate Palestinians anymore. I have a real issue with terrorists, let me tell you, all right? But not all Palestinians are terrorists. In fact, most of them are victims of the terrorists, just like we are. And, you know, with that, I learned that things are a lot more complicated than people see on the surface. And that if only everyone had the opportunity to hear all of the voices. Because if they did, I so believe that people would not just be standing alongside the Palestinians, but they would also be standing alongside Israel. Because you don't have to take a side in this conflict. You know, for the last 5 weeks, so many people said, well, I can't take a side, I can't take a side. How many of us heard that, right? See, now I'm not talking about that. It's not hard to take a stance against murdering babies. It's just not. It's not hard to take a stance against gang raping women. It's just not. It's not hard to take a stance against a massacre that has, again, the worst massacre to befall the Jews since Holocaust. That's not hard. It's not hard to condemn Hamas. That shouldn't be difficult. But I understand the challenge of choosing a side. I'm a Zionist. That's a side, for sure. I'm also very much pro-Palestinian. And I want the Palestinians to be able to live freely. I want them to be able to live with dignity. I want them to be able to live under a leadership of their own that actually cares about them. And that's not Hamas. So you don't have to take a side. I mean, you're in this room, so you've taken one side for sure. I would encourage you to stand on the other side as well, because we need more voices like that in this world. Voices that say that I care about human beings. I care about innocent people. because I do. And I learned, thank God, that hate gets me nowhere. And that the best thing that I can do for the future of Israel and the Palestinians is to spread knowledge, spread understanding, and to be able to infuse in people a compassion that oftentimes is very hard to feel for what many would perceive to be their enemy. But again, Palestinians are not my enemy. Terrorists, they're the enemy of all of us. Extremists, the enemy of all of us. And to make that separation is the first step in creating a better future. So I became an activist, and then I became an educator. And now I'm an educator. And I work for an organization that very much believes that education is the road to peace. That through education, through knowledge, through more understanding, we can develop compassion, and we can develop the ability to compromise for the sake of a better future together. And that's what I do every single day. I travel the world as international senior educator for Stand With Us, and I try to infuse in people an understanding and a compassion in the hopes that we can someday solve this conflict once and for all. I have to tell you, I feel better right now because for the last 5 weeks, it's been very hard for me to feel any kind of compassion. Many of us are still consumed with our grief. And some of that involves anger and in those moments of just rage, just absolute rage. And so it's nice to be able to stand up every day and keep talking, because the more I talk about compassion, the more I hope that it comes back to me. And I know it will. It'll just take some time. I'm in a grieving period right now. But that's me, that's my life. And I am such a firm believer that through education, through knowledge and good, solid history and facts, and not distortions and misinformation and propaganda, but learning the real story and pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, that we can create a better future. And so I will work every single day to try to create that better future for Israelis and for Palestinians, so that we can all maybe see a better future in our lifetime. And I'm glad that I have a room full of people here in Norway that are doing that with me. Thank you all so much.
Questions?
Oh, sure.
I will join you on stage.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions?
I'm
also going to do another session right after this about Hamas, Gaza, the war. So if there's any questions about that topic, you can ask them after.
They have already sent the questions through text to save some time. What should I tell people claiming that that Gaza is a big jail, and that they have been lacking resources because of the blockade through many years?
So maybe we should wait on that one, just because I'm going to go into the whole history, maybe, just for the sake of time, because I don't want to have to repeat myself, right?
How can you succeed fighting anti-Semitism?
Great. It's a very important question, obviously, today, more than ever. First of all, speak up. It's very important. If you're Jewish, I would say the biggest smack in the face to anti-Semites is just being more proudly Jewish. Right? Wearing my star out, being very bold, talking about being Jewish is something that I do very, very prominently, because that is the way of saying, you can hate us all you want, but we're not going anywhere. Oh, we almost got through it. So first of all, speak out. Second of all, educate yourself. It's his microphone, it's not mine.
Yeah, mute on.
Educate yourself. It's really the top of the list, because you won't be able to explain or be able to combat anti-Semitism if you don't understand it yourself, right? And the challenge of anti-Semitism is that it's a virus. It's a virus that mutates, right? And so it's so hard to put your finger on it, because if you asked yourself, well, why did they hate Jews in the Soviet Union? What would be the answer? Because they were capitalists, right? Meanwhile, let's not bring up the fact that Karl Marx was a Jew. Just throwing that out there. Crazy concept, right? But that's the thing, right? Jump to America at the same time. Why did they hate Jews in the United States at that time? Or why would they say that they hated Jews at the time? Because they were communists. So in the same time, we were capitalists and we were communists. Because we were, by the way. Because you're going to find Jews that are everything, right? But in every generation, there's a reason, but it's not really the reason. The reason is because they're Jews. And as Jews, I think the hardest part about anti-Semitism is, of understanding anti-Semitism, is that mutation that happens in every generation. And let's really put our finger on why anti-Semitism is so prevalent. When you look at anti-Semitism, what we see is that the core feature of it is scapegoating. People find what's bad in the world, something that they are a victim of, and instead of looking inwards to figure out why this is happening to me, I choose to blame somebody else. And the Jews are the easiest target. Why? Because we've always remained a people within a people. We've always kept ourselves somewhat separate from everybody else. We had to. So we have to understand anti-Semitism. We have to understand how it manifests, and then we can fight it more effectively, right? So that's number one. So I said educate yourself and then speak out. Stand by the Jewish people. Don't wait for the Jewish people to organize a rally on behalf of Israel. Organize one yourself and then invite the Jews to come, right? Online, in your spaces, wherever you are, talk about anti-Semitism. People might say, why are you bringing this up? You say, hey, I don't know, have you read a newspaper in the last month? And I love when people say to me, Charlotte, why are you bringing up anti-Semitism? That's really uncomfortable. And I'm going to say, you know what's uncomfortable is experiencing anti-Semitism, not me talking about it. And that's the problem. I live in a world where in every conversation I bring up the fact that I'm Jewish, and I bring up the fact that I'm Israeli. And I open up a space where I can have the conversation about anti-Semitism, where I can say to somebody, yeah, it's an issue, and then maybe ask me, why? What's going on? Why do so many people hate the Jews? Which people have asked me, just like that. Because I created a space where it was okay to ask that question. So educate yourself, and then make it a point to talk about it whenever you can. And that way you can educate others, and you can help people understand that no matter what happens in this world, and no matter what's going on with Israel, that there's no reason to hate Jewish people, right? In a nutshell, there's more, but we'll leave it there.
Thanks. I think also the other questions are more related to the conflict.
Gaza. So let's take a break.
Yeah, we need a break. Meet again in 10 minutes. Minner om MIFF sine bøker. Det er helt unødvendig at Gabriel må ta med bøker tilbake til Sørlandet, ikke sant? Snart er det jul, du trenger å gi dette til familie og venner. Og hvis du da kjøper hvilken som helst andre 2 bøker, så får du denne boka for bare 1 krone. Fordi denne har vi veldig mange på lager av, og dere må ikke bli skremt av titelen «Voldtekten av Palestina». Men det er en bok som tar for seg mye av tidlig jødisk historie, og så fokuserer det hovedsakelig på tiden mellom Første verdenskrig og frem til 1938, skrevet av en forfatter som virkelig avslører hvordan britene ødela for mulighetene til en jødisk stat. Så kjøp 2 vanlige bøker, inkludert boka mi som vi snakket om i går, og så får dere denne for 1 krone. Ok, da møtes vi igjen 5:05.
Yeah, it's, thank you. Again, it's been a long time since I've told it, weirdly enough.